Hey everyone, hope you're doing well. Welcome to our webinar for today. We're calling it the Secret Retail Recipe, how to scale with wholesale in 2024. We've got some amazing guests. Just to give you guys a sense of what we're going to do, we'll do intros for our speakers. We'll go through a couple of topics in terms of helping people understand what's going on with wholesale, and then want to make sure we have plenty of time to do Q&A at the end and make it interactive. So just so you know who everybody is and kind of some setup stuff, by way of introduction, my name's Austin. I'm the co-founder and CEO at DrivePoint. We've got a great team, and it's been a super fun ride to work with awesome customers like the folks that we'll hear from today, as well as everybody else. A ton has changed in the market since we founded DrivePoint in 2021. So we've seen bunch of different kind of ebbs and flows in the market already in just a short time. Sort of wave number one was like all of the changes with iOS and TikTok, and the acquisition market's getting completely crazy. Inflation has surged over the last year, so prices are up for consumers, prices are up for you, prices are up for suppliers. That's obviously changed the world a ton. And I would say the other big piece, like kind of correlated with those things, is the VCs largely left, except for some great investors that have funded some of our companies and others. But a lot of that risk capital left the sector. And so more important than ever to get profitable, get to scale, run a real proper, healthy retail business. And so I think a big part of that shift is everyone looking to profitability, everyone looking to scale, and saying this fantasy of running a massive $1 billion D2C only business doesn't really exist. And wholesale is becoming a huge part. So we talk to our customers, we talk to tons of prospects, we talk to other brands in the ecosystem, and it's pretty much par for the course now that you hear someone say like, hey, we're in D2C, we're also selling on Amazon, and we're definitely looking to expand our wholesale presence as well. Or we're focusing on wholesale and we're thinking about opening D2C, but that sort of omni-channel mix with wholesale as a big piece of it is now kind of the default expectation, as opposed to something that it wasn't a couple of years ago. And so that's what we want to talk about today. If you're new to wholesale, hopefully you can learn some things that you didn't know about how to break into wholesale, or things that are important as you're just entering the channel. If you're an old salt and you've been, running promos and getting into wholesale for years and years and years, hopefully you can still pick up some tips about what's top of mind for buyers and just hear how some other leaders in the space are doing it. So again, super mission critical for us, for all of our brands. And I'm really excited to introduce our speakers. So in no particular order, I want to introduce our three speakers. First up is Nina McKinney. Nina is the Chief Strategy Officer at Oats Overnight. We've been working with Nina for over a year, and she's become a great partner and a great friend, and a huge supporter of DrivePoint. So always great to see you, Nina. Nina has a really interesting perspective as both a former investor and an operator, and has tons of exposure in the space. So Nina, if you wouldn't mind, can you give us kind of just the 10-second life story, so folks have a little bit of context on what you're up to in your role?
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be here. Thanks for having me, and excited to be sitting alongside David and Nick here, two other great brands and operators. So yeah, I have a venture background. Last summer, I like to say I crossed over to the light side of operating, and it's been a wild journey ever since. I sit over our finance department and our retail sales department, and then in general, just a lot of hiring and company structure and investor relations, etc., board management, all that fun stuff. Really, I like to say I get to what Brian can't get to at our CEO and founder in a day. So that's me. And I know it's not supposed to be a plug for DrivePoint, but Austin and his team have been exceptional partners to us, and especially as we're building out a finance team, they've been a massive cost saving. Little
Awesome.
plug there. Awesome.
Appreciate it. Yeah. What's your favorite part of the job day to day?
Such a good question. Corny thing is just I love winning new doors. It's just fun to win, and it's such a tangible thing. So any door, not that we say yes to every single door. I think there's a time and place to enter new channels, etc. But when we get new retail partners, I think nothing excites me more than getting Oats Overnight into the hands of many, because we have a great product that is better for you and highly nutritional. So
Awesome. All right, we'll save some dry powder on that. We'll keep going. All right, next up, David Such. So David is the Senior Director of Finance at Graza. David, obviously Graza has been growing massively fast and sort of exploding onto the scene. David has more of a wholesale than sort of a D2C background, so brings a lot of expertise to the table. Same thing, David, can you give us kind of the 10-second life story and tell us about, what's your favorite part of the day to day?
Sure. Yeah. So my venture into consumer products began after business school. Went to McCombs for MBA and joined Waterloo, the sparkling water, and was there for 3 years doing finance and operations. And have since joined the Graza team. Was our first hire, and been leading the finance department, and it's been just a wild ride, just an incredible growth story at Graza. That's, I would say, just the fun part of it is, with a startup, you're growing up and to the right, and there's just new challenges every day. So that's just been exciting to continue to grow and see how high we can get this thing. So it's been fun.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it. And last but not least, we've got Nick Wiseman. Nick is the co-founder and CEO of Little Sesame, which is revolutionizing the hummus category. We were just talking about how little innovation there's been. And so personally, as a consumer, I'm stoked that there's way better options coming. But Nick, why don't you give us your kind of life story and tell us about your favorite part of the gig?
Nice. Yeah. Thank you for having me. My name is Nick Wiseman. I found my way to CPG by way of restaurants. I spent about 10 years working in the fine dining world as a cook. I met my future partner, Ronan, on the New York City fine dining circuit. Both just wanted to kind of maintain, stay in the food world, but kind of break out of the parameters of fine dining. And so we spun out and rolled Little Sesame first as a fast casual restaurant in DC. And then in 2021, we spun out of that the CPG product, which we launched into Whole Foods. And it's been a fun journey ever since. We're now distributed across the US. We're still in our early phases of, CPG. It's less than 2 years old now, but we've seen a lot of success, and it's been fun to be on the growth curve. The day to day, I love seeing the product in the wild. We're distributed in some of the big retailer doors, but also in some small indie doors and communities all across the US. So it's fun to just visit small towns and see product and cool little info NCG co-ops and stores like that. And so it's always rewarding to see the product in the wild.
Definitely one thing you don't get as much in D2C, right? Like very intangible, and nothing like seeing the thing that you built on shelf, I think. Okay, cool. So let's get right into it. I want to make sure we have plenty of time to cover everything. So 3 big topics to kind of dive into. One is really getting started in wholesale. How do you get those first doors? And I think, what's all behind the scenes on that? What's going on in 2024? So you guys are talking to buyers and brokers every day. What are wholesalers looking for? And how can you make your pitches most attractive? And then the third is really around forecasting, obviously, in terms of opening this channel or trying to understand how much inventory you need to order and how that channel is going to look for you as you go forward. Would love to touch and hear a little bit about how you guys are forecasting challenges there. Anything that you guys have learned that kind of the hard way that might be good for other people to replace. But before we get into that, I thought it would be super fun. Like one of the things as I got to know the wholesale business a little bit more, that was kind of like a microcosm of the whole thing, was just how much jargon and kind of slang there is and weird acronyms around wholesale. So I thought it'd be fun to kick it off and ask each of you guys, like, what's your favorite super obscure and or just kind of like weird acronym or term that you might not know if you were just getting into the business? So I'll open it up. Whoever wants to go first, just jump right in.
I can kick things off. One of my favorites, well, I don't know if it's a favorite per se, is OI, which stands for off invoice. And essentially what this is, distributors will order your product at a discount, and no matter how much they buy in a certain window, it's discounted, 15, 20%. And so that was a new one for me. And it definitely impacts things from a forecasting perspective, as they like to play the game of not ordering at all and then ordering 3 months worth of inventory in in a 1 month time frame, and then not ordering again until the next OI period. So that's been my favorite so far to learn about.
Okay. OI, that's a good one. All right. Nina, why don't you go next?
Yeah, I think, I mean, I guess kind of an obvious one, velocity has been just a fun metric to really understand. I think you can look at it two ways. You can look at your units per store per week, but then your dollars per store per week. And then when you're trying to stack up against competitors, look at, dollars and units over total distribution points or over all commodity volume, ACV. So I just added like 85 different acronyms into one, but I think velocity is, fundamental to every single successful wholesale business, and understanding kind of how you look at it, and how you compare yourself to other people in the category, so you can create a compelling story to retailers as to, why you should be on shelf. Because ultimately retailers are effectively renting out spaces right on the shelf, and they want their rental space to be as productive as possible for them. And so you need to create a story around, why they should give you a lease over somebody else in the category. So
That's a great way to think about it. Yeah, you landed on, I got pods, UPSP dub, velocity. We got like 6 acronyms in there. So
there's like 85 in there, but velocity.
Okay, cool. All right, Nick.
That was a good planogram, just, which is like kind of the visual representation of the shelf and where your product ultimately shows up. And we found that like sort of your brand block on the shelf is super important to, how you'll perform and sort of proving out that velocity story. It's key, merchandising, product on the shelf, correctly tagged, TPRs correctly tagged, like all that stuff, those fundamentals, all that blocking and tackling is like really what a lot of this business is about, especially in these like higher velocity categories where products are moving off the shelf fast. So planogram is where the retailer puts you on the shelf makes a big difference.
Yeah. All right. So we actually got out of that one: planogram, brand block, and TPRs and pods. So we got like 4 for 1 on that one. My personal favorite is EDLP. So like I was like, that was the one that was like, I couldn't possibly, a lot of the other ones you can kind of guess if you squint. EDLP, I couldn't guess that at all. And I was like, oh my God, like the thing that's in the ads is actually a real thing. Like, so EDLP is everyday low price. And so you'll do EDLP discounts or other things and try to either negotiate those in or out, depending on what's going on. So awesome. Well, that's a great way to kick things off. I think it's like a harbinger of just like how many quote unquote secrets there are in this space, and how hard it can be to break in if you don't know the language and you don't know the rules. So let's flip to that. So in terms of like starting out in retail, obviously many of our brands that we work with started out D2C and have migrated to retail. I think we've got a couple other perspectives here as well. As Nick, you've sort of chosen to actually pursue wholesale first and D2C in a follow-on, but I'd love to know, just like, talk about your first 6 months of kind of breaking in, or those first couple of relationships that you get. Did you use distributors? Did you not use distributors? Did you try and go direct? What were the pitfalls in terms of like ramping on shelf? Just sort of like, think about someone in those shoes of maybe they just got their first sort of order from Target or Walmart or Whole Foods or something like that. Like what's in store for the next 6 or 8 months? Nick, you're sort of going through it now.
I was going to take it a few steps back from there, even, once you're in Walmart, you're doing pretty good. But I would say, I think the focus in the beginning stages, again, to Nina's point, is all velocity. So really proving out that velocity story, that's what's going to open up those big doors. Like, and so I think, and part of that is like proving how you can be kind of accretive to the category. It's not just like cannibalizing existing sales, but how can your brand actually drive incremental new sales to the category? So that's like the big thing to do. And I think it's really hard to do that at scale. I think the D2C brands in some ways have an advantage. They've already built a brand base. They have a following. There's some brand awareness in the world. Going the other way, like I think it's really important that you focus like going really deep in key accounts, and thus you can really focus on like kind of pulling the levers in those accounts that are going to actually move volume off the shelf. And again, like velocity is everything. If you're not moving product, it's that's it. So
how do you get those first velocity numbers as you're going into like, right? Because you start at 0. So how do you prove that there's any velocity at day 1?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of like the traditional levers are pulling are just like going in and demoing in store, just like driving trial any way you can. Obviously TPR, like discounting products, probably the most classic way to like improve baseline sales. But yeah, I mean, I think those are the two big ones, I think, out of the gate, especially going into like natural channel, that have been proven to be pretty effective.
Cool. And then maybe let's do Nina and then David. But Nina, so you guys are obviously like have some pretty good distribution now, but very much a D2C first brand for a good period of time. So maybe talk about how it looked for you guys. How much of a tailwind was that? How much new learnings were there? Obviously, that you guys have done a bunch of things kind of differently. But what was that initial push into wholesale like for you guys?
Yeah. So, we have a thriving D2C business, which is a little bit rare in food, right? But we know that the majority of customer purchases in food are happening in stores. So we always knew as a company that we would go into wholesale. I have some product next to me, but this is our D2C product. So it's pouches, you get a blender bottle with it, and mix it up and add your own milk source. But this was our retail solution. So think about it as a single-use blender bottle. And it has oat milk powder in it. So you can just fill water to the fill line, shake it up, ready to drink. And so really for us, we knew that this product, while optimized for D2C and e-commerce, we needed something that would be optimized for shelf. And so launched with this, and intentionally went with retailers, where we were able to like really collaborate together. Wegmans was our first retail partnership. They have an awesome portal. They're very open with sharing kind of the data of not only how you're performing, but how other brands are performing in the set. And they now have we have the largest brand block at any of our retailers at Wegmans. But they were a great retail partner because they helped us really learn not only what our velocities were like, but what other brands velocities were like in the category. And so what I would say is, as you're thinking about, so for us, it was a very unique in that we had a large business on e-commerce. We need to make sure that this new format was optimized for retail. We've since seen a lot of success, and we're now in, a number of Whole Foods regions, Target, Walmart, HEB, Meijer. The list kind of goes on. We're in a little over 7,500 doors today. But for us, when we first launched, we very much treated it like it was a first to market brand. Because we wanted to make sure that this format was really translating with our customer base. And so what I would say is, as you're picking those first retail customers, partnering with retailers that are really going to partner with you about, okay, this is what your velocities are, these are what other velocities are, and really have that like ongoing communication. Because I think that it can be really hard in retail to get that data feedback loop. In D2C, like we get it real time, right? And so it really required us to have a strong partner at launch to make sure that we were getting those learnings real time, rather than waiting a year on shelf and then learning at the reset that we were not performing as well or performing phenomenally, right? So that would be kind of my recommendation to people as they're first getting started, is to, like Nick said, go deep, and just be really intentional with what those partnerships look like.
Yeah, I think it's great advice that like wholesale is not a homogenous marketplace, right? You will get different levels of partnership from different levels of retailers, and they may or may not be interested in your particular category or not. So it's almost like choosing an investor in that sense of like, you got to kind of know what everybody's bailiwick is, right? And try and cater to the folks that are going to be most likely to support your unique value prop.
Right. You wouldn't go to a Series B, private equity group when you're, just starting out, right? Because you're not ready for them. And so it's really the same in wholesale, as you want to kind of build that story and build that track record as you're building doors. And so to start with those, great foundational partnerships.
Awesome. All right, David, flip it to you. You guys obviously kind of somewhat similar playbook. I think you're maybe a little bit earlier getting broader distribution into wholesale than Oats in terms of just absolute scale or maybe timing. But yeah, what's it been like for you guys? And I know that the D2C success that you guys had was definitely a tailwind for you, but maybe talk about kind of, those early days in general, and then what's been unique about Graza.
Yeah, so I mean, I would echo definitely everything that Nick and Nina have said, but for Graza, we always wanted to be an omni-channel brand, launch D2C, build that brand presence, and then go into wholesale. but the traction and expansion into wholesale just happened way faster than we originally planned for and anticipated. So, day one we had a huge launch success. We sold out within 24 hours, and then day two, Whole Foods slides into our DMs and says, are you considering expanding into retail? So like that's not obviously a common story, but I think that's kind of how Graza um, got to where we are today, is just expanding faster. But you want to find the right partner. Whole Foods has been a tremendous partner for us out of the gate, supporting us and giving us great shelf placement, but then also being merchandised in the produce section, which has been a huge win for us. Having that secondary placement next to, the tomatoes, where, people are always walking by the produce store, that really helps our velocity numbers stand out, because in order to expand into the, Target, Walmarts of the world, you're going to need to show success elsewhere. And so picking those first retail partners, making sure you win there, is critical to success down the line. So yeah, fast forward to today, where Graza's in 7,000 stores, and just launched in Target and Albertson Safeway. But having Whole Foods as that first partner was really set us up for success.
Yeah, it's awesome. And how much did Whole Foods, obviously, like Whole Foods found out about you guys through social and sort of like your D2C presence? How much was that, you think, like an actual selling proposition for them in terms of like, oh, there's an existing audience for this brand?
Yeah, I think that helps tremendously. It's like, it's one thing to have this new product that no one's ever heard of. And, while packaging might look, sexy and cool, it's one thing to have, a following on Instagram and TikTok, and, really see the brand already come to life in D2C. It's much easier to point to, hey, we're going to have success on your shelf, just give us a chance, than like, put us on the shelf and who knows if we'll succeed. It's much easier to have that selling point when you already have traction and product market fit.
Yeah, very interesting. And then I think one point to call out from both your and Nina's experience, at least, is like you guys have a form factor differentiator. Nick, you're talking about form factor differentiator in kind of our pre-call. You guys obviously have some form factor, at least differences in the channels and other things like that. I don't think we need to go deep on it, but just kind of an interesting highlight that like, hey, let's be really aware that like the form factor at retail means a ton, and its form factor is a lot more than just packaging and logo and things like that. And it has a lot to do with where can you get those secondary placements and how easy can you make that and all of those other pieces for retail. So kind of put a pin in that, and maybe we come back to it in the Q&A, but very interesting learning. This is one that I think we'll come back to in the forecasting section as well. But like, how did you guys figure out how to either, cover the cost of that first PO or that first load in? Like, I think that's a challenge where people don't quite think ahead about it. Like, oh my God, they're gonna want to load this in, and they're actually going to load in, the first 8 weeks of product. And so that's going to be maybe the biggest PO or the biggest order that I've ever placed with my supplier. Like, how do you manage that initial tension, both from a capital perspective of like, do I have the cash to do it? And then in terms of thinking about like the risk associated with that initial bet in wholesale.
Yeah, certainly the initial load in POs are the biggest things to watch out for, making sure you forecast correctly, because it's, loading in, just say you're launching in 100 stores, they're going to need to fill those stores with, in Graza's case, it's, 2 cases per SKU. And, olive oil has historically been a slow moving category. So you're going to have a big spike, day one, and then it's kind of anyone's best guess of what your velocity will be from there then on. So, understanding inventory, demand planning, and from a cash flow perspective, working capital needs, like that's very critical to just make sure you're buttoned up to plan for that large, first order spike. But then also you want to bank on succeeding, and if they order, replenishment POs, the following week, that you also have inventory to service those. But at the same time, you don't want to put all your cash into inventory if things move slower than expected. So it's definitely critical to get that initial load in kind of quantities dialed in.
I think it's also important to understand kind of how you are selling to the customer. So I'll give some like tactical examples in Oats's case. So for Walmart, we sell direct to Walmart, but because we're nationally, we go through a consolidator. So for us, we self-manufacture. So I'll just say from the time of producing good, right? We have to give ourselves about a month from that production to get it up to RJW, who's our consolidator for Walmart. And then Walmart will issue a PO. And then from there, it takes on average from that PO about 9 days to get to store. And then from that PO, it's about, depending on the invoice, like 30 and the customer 30 to 90 days to actually get payment. And so in that instance, there's probably an extra month or so of float that we're having to give because we're going through a consolidator. With Target, we sell direct, but we go directly to Target's DCs so effectively, as soon as we get the PO, it just goes directly from our docs to Target. And so that takes about a month off of what that cash cycle will look like. Meyer, we go through KeHE, right? So that has a different impact. Going through UNFI has a different impact than KeHE. And so all of these, whether you're going through a distributor, having to use a consolidator, or selling directly to a customer, all of them are going to have slightly different working capital cycles, if you will, and cash cycles. And so it's really important to kind of understand those at the beginning, so that you have an idea of how long it's going to take from production of inventory or ordering or receipt of inventory through, through to payment. So.
Yeah, we actually had a customer who was launching in a large national retailer, and like we helped them kind of do the math, but it was basically like they were going to have to do this giant load in order, right? And then the payment terms were such that they were probably actually going to have to put a deposit on their first replens before they got paid,
right,
on the first load in, right? So like the effective cash cycle for them was a huge working capital demand, right? In the middle of a business that was like doing great, but like, as we all know, just because you're doing great in the retail business doesn't mean that you have any cash. So like creates this huge sort of cash vacuum as you go in. So I think that piece gets lost on a lot of folks, especially coming from D2C, where like AR is not a thing. The days
right.
AR is zero in D2C, basically, or effectively zero, right? So Nick, I
Right.
don't know if
And because we're self-manufactured, we have a higher gross margin, right? Because we're not paying a third party to make our product, but we have to effectively, we start paying it raws. And then this is where it gets really important if you are using a co-man. And I've seen a lot of businesses, especially if you're D2C and you're using a co-man where it's like 50% down at order, 50% down at receipt, that might not be a big deal. But then when you start getting into wholesale, if it's 50% at order and maybe you're ordering, 12, 16 weeks out, and then, you receive it, then there's probably 2 months before it actually gets to the customer, or you get the PO, and then there's, another 2 months until you get payment. You're looking at a really long, cash cycle. And so really thinking through those things as you are evolving into different channels is super important.
Yeah. Nick, anything to add on that one?
No, I think, I think there's a couple, things that separate and sort of like are worth delineating, which is like self-manufacturing, working with a co-packer. We also self-manufacture, which just changes that cash flow cycle. And we're able to produce mostly to forecast on demand on a 1 month cycle, which I think helps. There's not like the coordination with co-packer. And then I think the second is like cold chain versus not. Obviously, like we're getting, we saw like 6 replenishment POs from UNFI before we got paid on our first net 90 payment from UNFI. So definitely like long, hard cash flow cycle there. We felt it. And I think that's something to just be aware of, is especially in cold chain where you're just getting the frequency of orders is much higher.
Yeah. It's just I like, as I'm explaining the business to people who aren't consumer insiders, or kind of what we do. I'm like, it's not the only, but like one of the only businesses in the world where you can be absolutely killing it and like go bankrupt in the process because you run out of money to actually fund how good you're doing. The faster you grow, the more cash hungry the business gets. Okay. Let's shift gears a little bit to what's happening right now in the marketplace in terms of like what's changed since you guys launched, or, as people are thinking about doing all of their sets for 24 and sort of thinking about all of that stuff. Like, what's top of mind for those buyers? And most of our audience is food and bev today, so you can be kind of specific to that category. But like, what are people really looking for? What moves the needle? We talked about velocity and like how that's super critical. So like, let's assume that velocity is kind of the baseline. Like, what are those differentiated value adds or those stories that we think buyers or wholesalers are most interested in heading into 24?
Yeah, so I think from a buyer's perspective, they're managing their category or set, and they're trying to maximize the dollars that those bring into their specific store. And so when you're talking about, adding someone in, you also have to take someone out. So it's, understanding comprehensively what the, olive oil category looks like. Graza's main differentiator has been the squeeze bottle to date. We're the only ones on shelf that has that, and so like that's enabled us to win. And buyers will give us a look for that alone, but also the price point is a main differentiator. If you want to have a variety of different price points at shelf, you want to have your $5 lower priced items as well, and then also they would need to cater to people who want to spend $20-$30 on olive oil. So having that variety in the set allows anyone who walks into the store to pick out whatever brand of olive oil makes sense for their specific needs. And they're trying to, I guess, complete the set and to maximize revenue for the olive oil category. So if someone's comparing Graza versus an existing olive oil brand, it's okay, it's the same price point. What are the other differentiator factors? It's like, okay, well, it's ours is from Spain. Like maybe consumers care about that, or it's been the squeeze bottle, and like our branding and packaging also stands out. And so like that's kind of what the buyers are looking at when making a decision on what brands to bring in.
Awesome.
From like a broader trends perspective, I think we're, not necessarily only seeing this from the buyers, but just in general, I think a lot of people probably read like that Wall Street Journal article this past weekend about Ozempic and kind of what that's doing to food consumption in general. And today 1% of the US is on Ozempic. It's predicted that 7 to 10% will be over the next couple of years, and people that are using that drug are consuming 20% less food, which is really impacting specifically like snacking and non-nutritionally dense categories. And so something that we've seen from our buyers is in general, they're looking for nutritionally dense food, because we sit in the cereal aisle. So that's hot and cold cereal. And so they're looking for nutritionally dense food. For us, obviously, we highlight our protein, complex carbs, the benefits of soaking your oats overnight, all those different things, chia seeds, et cetera, that we're using in our products to provide that nutrition dense. But that is like an overarching trend in food that we're seeing right now, that we're really conscientious about talking about how our product lends itself to that massive shift. You've also seen a pretty significant shift in consumer spending in general. A lot of the large strategics are seeing softening in specific categories. And I think that we're really conscientious of what that looks like for us at Oats, and how we can bring to buyers where they're seeing consumer softening and spending. We can bring something differentiated to their set, brings customers back to their set. So again, we're talking about our digital presence, who our customer is. We have data from our customers about, how they consume our product, how frequently, all those things, and we're bringing those stories to retailers. And then the third thing that we're seeing more and more of, which this is probably due to the fact that we're self-manufactured, but we're having a lot more retailers talk to us about kind of made locally programs, or job creation, et cetera, like local US support. And so we've had a lot of conversations with retailers about kind of what we're doing in the Arizona market. We also just opened a new facility in Ohio. And so what we're doing in that market, and that's something that across the board, we're seeing all buyers really interested in that. And that's something that they're, the retailers are focused on supporting. So we've seen success there. I don't know if that's like the direction you wanted to go, completely different direction than David, but those are kind of some things
yeah,
that we're seeing.
That's what I was sort of
Um,
seeking. It's like you got to weave all these elements together into a story, from like the functional benefits to the macro tailwind. Nick, I'd love to kind of hear what's central to your story, or kind of what you think
I mean, I
is.
think I'll just like close that out. Like what we're thinking about, like we just got through all of our retailer kind of 2024 planning meetings. And I think for us, it was really thinking about like presenting innovation to them, like kind of hitting on those same points. Like how can we be like a creator or like grow sales in the category, and like what's that innovation going to do? And I think also in a like given the sort of macroeconomic climate, like everyone's sensitive around margin. And so I think like also kind of telling the margin story to retailers. And when we thinking about our innovation, like how can our innovation be margin accretive to us, of course, but also to retailers, as they're looking to like kind of get more and more margin as well. And so, you know, we really thought about like, and when we built our innovation pipeline, it was a lot about like how we could compete on shelf price point wise, but also make sure we we're like delivering healthy margin on both sides.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, the other thing that I think you guys all have going for you, and I'm curious to sort of think about this, is like just from a demographic perspective. Obviously, like, you know, millennials are having tons of kids, like Gen Z is not far behind. Is there any sort of like generational transfer or spending power transfer that you guys are like, hey, we're just like, you know, I think Sabra is a great example, or Quaker Oats, or like olive oil, right? Like you guys are all operating categories where like the leaders or the incumbents are sort of these old staid brands. Like how much does brand, I guess, or sort of being able to market to a younger consumer work in your favor in these conversations?
I mean, there's good data that Gen Z, it's 138% more hummus than millennials. So we lean on that one a decent amount. And obviously, like being the brand that can kind of build for the future.
Yeah.
You know, we've kind of led the category in regenerative. We built like regenerative supply chain for our chickpeas. First the category, we just actually bought the first 50,000 pounds ever of ROC chickpeas. And so that's sort of been a big sort of like, you know, where the retailers are really moving is like trying, especially in the natural channel, like moving to own regenerative. We've also been looking at doing like some like climate analysis of product at some of the bigger retailers, as well as like they're being held more accountable for climate footprint. Products that can kind of make claims of net neutral or close to that are definitely going to have like a you know, have another sort of selling point to make. So I think that's something that we're definitely looking at. But I think that's, you know, definitely like looking at how you can build to the future is key, and what those sort of like bringing in the next gen is definitely, you know, gets the retailers excited.
Yeah, that's awesome. So what I'm hearing, and just to kind of try and synthesize, is like, you know, like the first thing we talked about very minute one when you guys were bringing in wholesale, everyone sort of was head nodding like it's mostly velocity, right? Like at the end of the day, velocity will trump everything else, right? If the product doesn't move, the story doesn't matter. And then so like that's the base of your kind of pyramid story. And then listening to you guys all talk, either, you know, and knowing you guys a little bit, like there's definitely a functional layer that's sort of required, which is like, what are the functional benefits, features, advantages of this product, form factor, nutrition, differentiation, flavor innovation, right? All of those things are sort of the middle. And then you've got to have that top piece, it sounds like, is sort of the icing on the cake. So Graza, you guys have Spain, and you guys also have I think like, you know, the social, or sort of that, whatever that piece is, that you have the zeitgeist, right? And, you know, I think you guys have these macro trends around calorie density. Nick, you guys obviously have the regenerative angle. So like, that's not a bad, doesn't seem like a bad template for a story for someone walking in, of like, okay, why will it sell? What's like actually differentiated on shelf? And then like what makes us special for right now or today or whatever, however you want to talk about that landscape. Is that fair? If we had to create a pyramid of pitches, is that
I think that's super fair. There's one other layer that I'd add that I think like all three of these brands bring, but most successful brands at wholesale bring, is a story around incrementality to your category. So you're bringing dollars to the category, whether you're bringing new shoppers to the category, or there's like a trade up in price, or there's a trade up in consumption. Somehow you're growing the category and bringing incrementality, but also bringing incrementality to the store. And so increasing that shopper basket. And so you can do that a lot of different ways. You can, you know, bring the Gen Z into the store. You can, like, you know, for us, we had data going into our Target pitch about how, you know, the majority of our customers, digital customers, shop at Target. But they might not shop at Target for food and beverage. And, you know, basically they said, but if you did have oats at Target, we would buy it there, and we would go and buy other things while we're in that aisle. So creating those stories around how you're bringing customers into store, growing their individual category, but growing that overall basket of what the consumer's purchasing. I think it's really important. So having this is who our consumer is and why that consumer is really important to you, retailer, as you're looking to grow your business.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the fact, like, the data piece, I think, makes that argument so much more powerful. And I like that because that's something that you can do even as a reasonably small player. If you have a D2C footprint, or Nick, if you have an existing retail footprint, is just to, like, let's run a quick and dirty survey of your customers and find out how many are shopping at a specific retailer, and would they buy your product there, and any kind of proof points that you can bring, especially early in that life cycle, to highlight that there will be diverse or velocity and incrementality. Very interesting, right? It's sort of like the competitive dynamic, I think, is something that definitely doesn't exist. Maybe exists a lot more in the Amazon ecosystem, but D2C is a little bit, you can have a little bit more competitive blinders on around price, and sort of like, it doesn't have to be quite a zero-sum game, but that physical real estate aspect makes it much more clear. All right, that was awesome. Mike's chiming at me because we're behind, because I talk too much and I love this stuff. So I'll pop into sort of topic number 3, and we can touch on this quickly. I think it's probably the least sexy of all of them, but obviously, what we do every day is thinking about forecasting and trying to create the best scenarios that are going to optimize business growth. How are you guys, sort of broadly speaking, forecasting for wholesale, and figuring out how to do that? And maybe take it from the lens of, like, hey, if someone's just getting started, right, and like literally has maybe a financial model where D2C is totally built out and has a blank spreadsheet tab and says, okay, how do I figure out what I'm going to sell in wholesale? How would you think through that problem, and what are the nuances that are critical to get right?
Yeah, so for Graza, it's our forecasting methodology for retail is pretty simple. It's the formula is how many stores are you in, and how many on average, how many bottles per week does each store sell? And there's obviously nuances of Whole Foods is going to sell more than another customer. So defining what kind of granularity you want to do, and then the other aspect when you're launching is the load in POs. So those are going to be larger POs initially, and then you'll have the replenishment after. And forecasting, it's never going to be right, but you need to have one, and it's going to be your best guess. And the important thing is to just react as soon as you know more information. Obviously, you have no data to go off of when starting out, and so what's been difficult for Graza is we've been disrupting the olive oil category, and so the forecast that some of these retailers are expecting out of us is much lower than what we're doing. And we're trying to every inch of the way working with the brokers saying, and the buyers saying, hey, like, you haven't ordered enough, we're going to blow through that inventory in 2-3 days, like, please order more. And so everyone goes off of historical performance and distributors of how much to order. And with more and more data, those forecasts can get dialed in. But at the end of the day, it's how many doors are you in, how much are you selling per week. There's obviously promotional activity which will influence things, but that's a whole different type of beast.
Yeah. Well, I think it is important in terms of, like, one, just the level of granularity. Like, I think a lot of the first like, a lot of times we'll get a customer who comes in when they've just built a basic wholesale model, and maybe it has doors, but the SKUs are all lumped together, or the pricing is all lumped together, or something like that. And I think, the interesting thing is, like, you do actually have to get fairly granular, at least at the account level, and probably by account, by SKU, to actually be able to understand that stuff. I know we've been doing a lot of work with you on that front, David, just to get even further down the line. But yeah, Nina and Nick, how are you guys thinking about it? I would assume it's fairly similar methodology, but what are the key pieces for you guys?
Yeah, I think he hit on all the things. I mean, I think the sort of the second piece I'd say is, like, actually getting distributors to get product to the doors. So, like, looking at fill rates of your distributors and making sure that, like, you're actually delivering product, even if you have enough inventory in your DC's warehouses, making sure that product's actually making to the stores. That's sort of like part 2. Is not you can produce enough product, but you often won't see product on shelf, especially in these higher velocity categories, or if you're beating kind of planned demand. So I would say, like, really working really closely with your distributors to make sure that, like, the ordering cadence actually reflects the sales performance, not just like planned demand that went in 6 months ago. And that just takes a lot and that's just like you're constantly working with them to try to increase order volume and cadence to just make sure there's product. So I think that's the big one is not only just like internal planning, but it's also then like actually making sure that is reflected in the real world.
Yeah. I want to get to you too, because I know we've gone through a ton of nuance on some of this stuff, but like, I think what's super interesting in those two examples is I'm listening and it's like, it's not incumbent on the retailer to push your product, right? Like it is like, they will say, and I think a lot of people when they're first getting into it is like, oh, they're just going to take my product and they're going to sell it. And like, that's what the margin hits for is they're marketing it. They're doing all the work, but there's a ton of work to actually from the brand side to actually push the product through and get it on shelf. I think that's the other, there's one other thing that we've definitely seen with some people is like, hey, I got into 4,000 doors. And so they model like, hey, I'm going to be in 4,000 doors in month one. It's like, no, you're actually not. Like that product's going to sit in the back of the warehouse. It's going to sit at the DC. It's going to take you a while until you actually physically get on shelf in all of the quote unquote doors that you're in. Right. And that's incumbent upon you to sort of do as much as you can to push it all the way on the shelf. So I think it's a huge point. All right, Nina, forecasting. What's top of mind for you? What are the most critical aspects?
Yeah, I mean, I think David and Nick covered it all. The only thing I'll just say, see some of this, but I've seen it more in other brands. It's just if your brand has seasonality to it, right? If your category has some seasonality to it, that's something that you definitely want to keep in mind because kind of what Nick alluded to is it takes a little bit for product to get on shelf. So your orders don't always match your velocities and just not to get caught off guard. And make sure that you're managing that forecast with the retailer really closely, but also internally recognizing when there's different peaks in your category would drive peaks in velocity.
Yeah. Okay. That's super helpful. And what would be some of those peaks in the category? Like, are those externally driven in terms of seasonality? Is that more driven by the retailers? Like, what are some examples?
Yeah, it could be. There's like a lot of different things that could drive it. Like for oats, we see relatively stable velocities throughout the year, but we see like a big spike in back to school. We also see a big spike in kind of that January, February timeframe when people are making decisions about their health and starting out new year, new you type thought. And so we see those spikes happen. And really for us, like we'll see a step up in velocities and then they kind of stay there throughout. The other thing to it's similar to promotional, which David and Nick have both mentioned, but if you're getting secondary placement or you're getting an end cap or you're getting some sort of off shelf out of that mainline set, that's going to dramatically impact your velocities and dramatically impact the amount of inventory you're going to get orders on. And so just making sure that you're including that in your forecast in some way. I find the easiest way to do it is just to tweak your velocities assumption rather than, adding a short column for like off shelf display or whatever. But if certain retailers are going to be giving you an end cap, then just pushing that velocity up for that period of time because it's going to look a lot different. So
David, looked like you had something on the tip of your tongue there.
Oh no.
Okay. And then roughly like how far out are you guys, attempting to forecast? Obviously we're setting annual budgets where things are sort of rough, but like what's sort of the cadence that you guys operate on in terms of forecasting, reforecasting, tracking budget versus plan, all that good stuff?
So we update, I would say monthly, we do a review and update our demand plan, but you're really forecasting to whatever your cycle production is. If you produce on, a quarterly basis, then, there's no point in updating your projections if you're not going to change your quantity that you're producing. At the end of the day, the forecast is used to determine how much product you produce and hope that whatever you're producing is sufficient to meet that demand. And if it ends up being higher than the forecast, you still have the safety stock in place to service that demand. But we look at it on a monthly quarterly basis as far as updating the projections because it is very critical to our success because the last thing you can afford is to run out of inventory.
What about you guys?
Well, Austin, this broadly for our business, it's very complicated. So we have, because we have over 45 flavors now, and then D2C, Amazon, and retail. So our S&OP process is weekly. And so we're looking at forecasts weekly that blend up into everything so that we can modify our production. Something that we've worked a lot with Drive Point on, and just different weeks look slightly different specifically for our D2C business, but then that blends, when retail blends in there based on loading orders, et cetera, it can really evolve pretty quickly. So we have an S&OP process where we're looking at all this on a weekly basis. And then we will update kind of anything, what I would call below the line. So gross margin below, we do that on a quarterly basis from a forecasting perspective. I don't think everybody needs to do weekly, but just given that we're self-manufactured and the size of business, and we are, constantly producing, it's something that we are constantly tweaking and make sure that we have basically a weekly 12 months out in a given time. Right now we have about 18 months out because we're planning for 2024, but make sure that we have at least a year weekly out.
Yep.
Yeah, we're monthly, quarterly. I mean, again, it's we self-manufacture, so we're constantly looking at things, especially like new retailer launches in this early growth phase where there is a lot of like, it's not it's not just sort of like not many plateaus, a lot of growth month over month. So definitely, we're looking at it monthly. Larger projections we're like kind of revising quarterly.
Got it. Awesome. All right. I want to jump into Q&A. So if you have been hanging around and have a question for any of these guys, please drop it into the chat. We've got a couple here to go into. So I'll just kind of go rapid fire, and then maybe we'll kind of like whoever wants to jump in first, we'll get one answer, and then we'll kind of try and move to the next one so we can cover some more here. So first question is, how do you balance how do you manage the balance between trade and margins? So how do you decide like how much you can give away and what's worth it to get some velocity, and where it's worth it to hold the line a little bit on the trade discounts?
Payback analysis. I think you just look at what the payback is on trade. What you ideally want to see is a spike when you go on trade, but then your pre and post trade velocities look slightly different, aka you acquired a consumer while you were on trade. So doing an analysis of, okay, post that trade promotion, what did our velocities look like for the weeks post that, and is that higher, and so was that incremental dollars worth it?
So basically, like, you're okay with it even if the unit margin goes down in some way, shape, or form, if aggregate gross margin was higher, we're happy campers, basically.
Like, what was the return on investment of that spend?
Okay, so you would actually take the trade spend dollars and then look at basically the incremental gross margin and try and do some math on that. Okay.
Yes.
Very cool. All right.
Happy to chat that with anybody anytime. I think there's lots of ways to look at it.
Yep. Okay, cool. Next one, tips for handling large negotiations with large chains for placement fees, shelf space, like slotting fees, any of that stuff. Can you negotiate it, I guess? And if so, how?
It definitely depends. In Graza's case, we had the advantage of olive oil being a harvest product, meaning we have kind of our yearly quantity kind of set from the get-go. And so the way we navigated the retail expansion in year one was, this is all the product we have. We can either give it to you or someone else, but like, we don't want to pay slotting. So that was a negotiation tactic in year one. It's not always negotiable, but that's, as much as you can, because that's like just a profit center for these retailers is, in order to get into the store, you have to pay this upfront fee, and negotiating that down as much as possible is critical to having increased profitability out of the gate.
Cool. All right. Should I go thinking about opening wholesale? Do you guys think that I should go national first, or should I try and go regional, or I guess we could say like natural, or some of the specialty channels? Like I'll paraphrase a little bit. It sounds like they're sort of like, okay, do I go after like one of these big fish, like a Wegmans, and like make a bet, or do I try and go smaller and go regional chain or natural first? Nick, looks like you had
Yeah,
an
I would
opinion.
definitely say go regional, and I think Wegmans could be an awesome partner. I mean, they're still pretty regional, but I think going deep in again either key accounts or key regions for all the reasons, freight, moving, product, logistics, density of distribution, and again like network effects of marketing. All those things make sense for me to like really just focus regionally or in key retailers where you're going to have like most impact, and those marketing dollars are going to make the most impact. So I would say definitely focus is the key. I say like whether your focus is key retailers or your focus is key regions, one or the other, I'd say is definitely the right path.
Okay. So it's you guys, it looks like we've got vehement agreement on that front in terms of like, this is not a one and done, go for the big gun, big sweep kind of play. Like you got to build incrementally and show proof of distribution.
Yeah,
You
if you
gotta
go
build
big,
increment.
you have to
You have
support
to
it.
win. You have to win. So you only get one shot with the big retailers and you have to win. And so you don't get the benefit of testing and learning like you do with smaller, more regional focus, where you can really focus dollars and learn what works and what doesn't work for your brand. But you get one shot with the big guys, and if it doesn't go well, it's going to be many, many years before you can get back into that retailer. So.
Okay, so maybe if you've already sold like $1 billion food and beverage brand, you can go big, but unless you've done that, work your way up. Okay, last one here, and then I'll wrap it up for a second. But how do you guys do sampling, or what have you found to be the most effective sort of sampling or trial sort of promos in retail?
We're in the thick of it. We're building like a first party BA team all around the US. There's definitely some like online SaaS tools you can use to help kind of manage those programs that can be cool. But it's definitely a good tool to drive trial. And again, for us, it's like doubling down. Like it's as much having like eyes and ears in the stores and the merchandising impact of those people as it is just like is straight demoing and driving trial. So I think like we kind of view it as bringing in first party made sense for us because we got all the merchandising impact as well. And for us, again, in like a pretty high velocity category, being in the store frequently was a huge driver for us of success.
Awesome. Well, I think we could probably go for like a whole other hour, tons of value in here. I've been writing down all of the like slang and acronyms as we've gone. I've got a sheet full of like 25. So we're definitely gonna have to like publish a glossary blog post here. Make sure that everyone knows what we're talking about. But huge thank you to Nina and Nick and David. Can't thank you guys enough for being here. To everyone in the audience, number one thing, please go buy the product on shelf and buy it full price. So go pick up some Graza and some Little Sesame and some Oats Overnight for all your friends and family. Make a big deal about it. It's the coolest product in the world. You got to tell everyone, go pick it because we know those velocity numbers are key. So let's do our part. And then if anyone is interested in learning more about DryPoint, feel free to shoot me a note directly. I'm Austin at drypoint.io. We love this stuff. We love talking about forecasting and how to make sure that you're lined up as you think about making these big bets into wholesale or other channels. And we'd love to help you out. So with that, I'll say thanks again to our panelists and best of luck, everyone kind of breaking into wholesale in 24.